Welcome to the Boomer Briefing Podcast, where we help you solve a critical business issue in 20 minutes or less. I'm your host, Jon Hubbard, shareholder and consultant here at Boomer Consulting. And with me today is Gary Boomer. Hi, Gary. Thanks for being on this episode of the podcast.
Hi, John. It's my pleasure.
All right. Gary is the founder and chief dot connector here at Boomer Consulting. And we have a fun topic today. And if you know Gary, you know Gary is always thinking about the future. And he's always thinking about how to expand that future as well. And so the topic we have today is well suited for Gary, and that is how to be an exponential firm. Okay, how to be an exponential firm. So Gary, my first question to you is, what is an exponential firm?
Great question. And I'll give you the short answer and then we'll dive into more specifics. But an exponential firm is one whose impact or output is disproportionately large. And by that, I mean 10x over the competition. And the way they get there is by focusing on 5 pillars: their processes, their talent, their leadership, their technology, and their growth strategies. So that's the short answer to get us started.
No, that's great. You packed a lot in there in that short answer. You know, when you talk about, or when you said, you know, in an organization that's output is disproportionate to its size, right? 10 times. Another way to say that is punching above its weight, right? Is how can you be an organization that no matter what your size is, that you're really punching above your weight with what you're trying to achieve? So as you mentioned, those 5 areas, and an exponential organization focuses on those 5 areas. What are some additional characteristics of an exponential organization, and how can our listeners, our firms today, become an exponential organization?
Well, John, I think they're becoming exponential organizations, whether they realize it or not. And hopefully by the end, they'll see how they can accelerate that process. So let me give you just one example to get us started. And here, I don't know of any firm I've talked to in the last 6 months that the first thing out of their mouth is, we just got to have more people. We got to have more talent. And, you know, we've been talking about how the business model is changing in the accounting profession from a pyramid to a diamond. And really that diamond at the bottom, and rather having all these people, you're going to have to source some of the tasks. I didn't say jobs, I said source some of the tasks, and you're going to have to use automation. So if I were to take this to Silicon Valley, where this really started, and talk to people out there, they'd say this is all being driven by technology. And I will say technology is having a big portion of it, but also focusing on your unique ability and what you're good at and adding value to your clients is important. So I think that talent one is really relevant, and we'll talk about some specifics there of what firms are doing to really have access to talent.
Yeah, so let's do that. Let's talk about that. And before we have you expand on that, I want to kind of double back a little bit on the diamond versus the pyramid model. So what you were just describing there was kind of the organization of the old, in the sense that you have just a few people at the top, and each layer down has more and more people, and it just forms a nice little triangle, right? But what you're describing is, hey, the corners of that triangle starting to be chipped away by outsourcing and automation. Thus, the core of the organization starts to look more like a diamond shape, right?
Absolutely.
And you know, you're right. Depending on who you talk to, they're going to say, oh, this is totally fueled by technology. And again, you're right that, hey, technology plays a huge role in it, but there are lots of other influences that are driving this change. So let's talk about that talent piece, right? Getting in order to be an exponential organization, you need the right talent and you need enough of the talent. How are firms, from your perspective, Gary, solving this problem today?
Well, they're looking, as I alluded to, of sourcing task rather than jobs. And I think when I first got into sourcing in the early 2000s, went to India several times, everyone was talking about outsourcing to India because it was cheaper, but the technology wasn't there. So there is a global arbitrage where labor costs are less in other parts. But I think firms should also think about other tasks that they can outsource. I know at Boomer Consulting, we outsource email management. We outsource a lot of the duties that our project managers used to handle to a company. And that way we can purchase as many hours from them as we need. And it's really worked much better as we've gotten into that relationship because both sides have learned what's important and we change really the duties of those people. But before we get too far into that, I think I need to explain Exponential to the group, Jon, because we weren't trained, especially I wasn't trained as accountant or economist, to think exponential. I was taught to think incrementally. And there's one exercise that I often ask people in workshops is, would you rather have $1 million today, or would you rather double a penny every day for the next month? Well, they all jump to the conclusion they'd rather have the $1 million today. So, you know, your mind really can't comprehend what doubling a penny every day would be, because for the first 3 weeks, it's not that significant. But the last few days, at the 31st day, you would have 10,737,000 plus. And Ray Kurzweil, who has predicted most technology when it will impact the world and been very accurately, has said there's a law of accelerating returns. And when I came into the profession, probably the most technology was, and I am dating myself here, was a TI calculator that would do present and future value. And then early in my career, I purchased the first IBM PC for over $6,500. And we have seen things like the internet, the laser printer. And in the last 2 years, I would say 2 technologies that allowed us to move forward have been Zoom, which changed the way we work, and Microsoft Teams. So that's what I'm referring to as exponential. And hopefully that will help as we talk about some of the characteristics and how you as a firm may be further along than what you even think you are, because you're doing some of these. And the good part here, Jon, is you don't have to do them all to be successful. So you don't have to check every item off the checklist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. So, and I do want to get into the characteristics again, and kind of have you expand on that. And your comment you just made is really helpful, that, hey, you don't have to be all of these all the time. Probably choose a few and focus on those, and that will accelerate your success. So, Gary, back to you on the characteristics of an exponential organization.
Well, one is just staffing and being able to staff on demand, which everybody says we can't do that today. We just can't find people fast enough. So that means you're going to have to go down at the bottom of that pyramid, and you're going to have to automate tasks, and you're going to have to find people with unique abilities that you can outsource to. And let me give you some specific examples of what we're doing at Boomer Consulting. Delegate Solutions is the company that we use to act as administrative assistants for our coaches and handle email management and do tasks like that. Abby Connect answers the phone. And, you know, we're virtually a global company. We have people all over the US, and some of them even are traveling internationally. So they handle that. We have an accounting firm that does our accounting. Uh, we have an outside database manager for our CRM that's their unique ability. They love doing it. I haven't met anybody that we haven't employed that's the task they get up to do every morning. But we have graphic artists, we have video production people, and we even have a technical writer that writes part-time for us and also for Forbes magazine that is a CPA. And those are just examples. Well, probably one that has been the most advantageous to us and could be to all of our clients are project managers. And we have trained and developed those internally, but we've got to scale and have more of them going into the future. The other thing, the next thing is community. You really need to belong to communities so you have access to expertise and information outside your organization. So I mentioned our coaching program, Abundance 360, John Maxwell. Those are all people that we rely on. We're members of the blockchain, not AICPA, the Wall Street blockchain, participating with the AICPA, the state society. But I would say there's limitations when you are just within your profession. So going outside that profession provides you a much better perspective. And then the algorithms that people can use today. And we've developed some tools, we call them shortcuts, that take processes that might take you a week to do, and you can do in 5 or 10 minutes. And one is how you develop a vision, how you develop a strategic plan. We have tools that can take that process down to days rather than weeks or months. And then how are you leveraging your assets? All the firms out there wanting what they're going to do about their real estate. You know, many of them have more real estate than they need. How are they going to leverage that? How do they leverage their talents, knowledge, and take that knowledge to a global market rather than just a local market? And then engagement, and people talk about gamification. And if you watch how many companies are doing it today, they're really involving people in gamification. And I don't know a lot of firms that are doing a lot in that area, but I know we've used Verbella, which is a meeting tool, virtual meeting tool. And then just their participation in their own community, which has always been important. Those are 5 areas, and I've got a few more here, but what questions do you have about those 5?
Yeah, I know I have a comment on the tasks to automate, and I love that you keep emphasizing it's tasks, not jobs. And there's a lot of focus in our profession about providing jobs or hiring for jobs, and there's a huge opportunity to increase capacity when you can automate tasks. And you and I were just with a CMO group of some large firms just earlier this week. And one of the topics that we discussed is this whole automation of tasks within your firm is not isolated to just the tax, department, just the audit department, or just, those kind of traditional areas within the firm. There are automation opportunities throughout every department, every function, every role. And so getting your arms around those of what opportunities, if you just ask your team, if you could automate or outsource 5 tasks that you do, what would those be? You send that one question to your entire team, within 20 minutes, you will have more answers than you know what to do with, right? Because there's so many opportunities here. So I just wanted to, highlight that because I think you're really onto something there. But let's get back to the other, what are some other opportunities you see.
Well, John, I would just tag on to what you said about the automation piece is that for the first time that I can remember in my career, the tools are there to allow the professional who's close to the process to really drive the technology. In other words, it's what we call no code or low code, and it's developed by being able to define the process. The caution there is sometimes we don't realize how the technology can eliminate steps in a process that you didn't need. And so oftentimes firms tend to duplicate the processes even with the new technology, and it doesn't add value. So I just caution you there. But the last word here is really ideas. And those are more the soft part of this. And I like to ask firms, how easy is it to do business with you today? And most have to think a while. And the more they think about it, the more difficult it is. And the pandemic has really forced that upon us. It's what kind of interfaces do we have? Do you have a client experience officer or somebody in-house? Are you using project managers like I referred to? Do you use something like Microsoft Teams or a collaborative software, project management? How about proposal software? When you have virtual meetings, do you use Asana or Miraboard to capture that and follow up and manage? We just haven't had those tools. And then dashboards. Accountants love spreadsheets. Clients love graphics. And you really need 5 dials to run a business. Now it's just finding out which 5 dials, like on an airplane, are going to make you successful. So dashboards are important today. The other thing is experimentation. We don't experiment enough, and some of these things have to be tested, and you have to have the culture of the organization to be innovative and know that not everything is going to work out the way you had planned. In fact, it may take several experiments. And then I think autonomy, and this is a huge one. How do you drive the decision down to the lowest level of the organization where they're dealing with the customer? How do you flatten that out and make sure the decisions are right and that they add value to the client? And then finally, the social aspect of all of this. We used to attend Kiwanis or Rotary, and that's still available. But the number of contacts you can have in a digital world today is much greater. And that's why LinkedIn, social media, others are so important. And you have to have tools to manage your meetings. I hope this has been helpful. I know we've had to go fast, but there are several examples here that I believe many firms are closer than what they think to this exponential organization.
Yeah, and we have been going fast, but isn't that expected for a topic around the exponential organization, right? There's a lot here because there's so much opportunity, and we could probably take every single one of your characteristics and deep dive into that for a whole day workshop, honestly, just kind of strategizing around that. But I think that's been really helpful. A big takeaway I have from this entire conversation is around that outsourcing and automation. Now, you shared so much more than just that, but it's changing the way firms think about how they create value for each other and for their clients. And if we're not careful, we're stuck in the incremental, like you talked about, right? Oh, we need to hire one more full-time person, or we need to make these changes or additions to our organizations that we've done historically, but based on your definition, Gary, can be categorized as incremental versus how can we think differently about how we provide value for each other and for our clients and do it in a way that feels more exponential, or that is more exponential. And that's where it gets into that to that outsourcing and that automation. So with everything being said, Gary, What's your recommendation of a next step? Someone leaves here, they're energized by listening to this podcast, but they're thinking, okay, what's the one thing I can do when I stop listening to this podcast to kind of start to go down the right path here? What's your thoughts?
Well, there's always books to read, as I said, and there's one called Exponential Organizations. What I've done is really adapted some of that into my thinking and used it for accounting firms. So not only could you go buy the book Exponential Organizations, some of the writing that we have or that I've done for accounting today, also our workshops, our circles, we're addressing these issues because this is how firms are going to transform. It's not just going to be one thing, the pricing model, or it's not just going to be one new service line. It's going to be looking at the entirety of the needs and wants of our clients. And if we faulted in the past, John, we've looked at it from service lines. They need a tax return, they need tax planning, they need a financial statement. But here they need more. They need a vision. And that's probably the first step is if you're going to attract people today, you have to have a vision, and that vision has changed in the last 2 years. You may say it hasn't, but it has, with all the virtual capabilities that we've proven work. We're not going to go total virtual, but we're a leader who says their number one thing is to get everyone back in the office, I think is not a leader that I'd want to follow. That's not the vision for the future. So
Right.
Developing that vision is probably very important. And our website's a good place to go. And this podcast, along with, I don't know if there's 100 yet, but there's quite a few out there, can help people in all these areas.
Yes. Boomer.com is a great spot for resources just to start to read and absorb more information to topics that are related to what we just talked about here. And the podcast, Gary, thanks for the plug on the podcast as well, because we do release new episodes every Tuesday morning. And those episodes every week, they change depending on, or the topics change depending on kind of what we're focused on. So it may be a topic in leadership, talent, technology, processes, or growth, but it's all designed to help you become a more exponential organization. So as always, Gary, thank you so much for being on this episode of the podcast, and please subscribe to this podcast so you get notified as soon as each episode is released. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Gary.
You're welcome.